So the first topic we're going to choose is traveller experience. And this was ranked number 1, and it also had the biggest gap of 1.66 out of 5. So let's start with traveller experience and ask you first, I guess, why do you think that gap might appear between the importance the buyers place and the reality of delivery?
The world of work has changed around us. And I think that travel is more centred within company culture, and therefore there's more importance being placed by companies on their employees' experience more generally, and travel is one of the mainstays of that overall experience. So I think that it's now much more on the kind of C-suite agenda than it ever was.
I would agree with that. I think the last 2 years have really been significant when you talk about the end user's experience. And I think part of that has been the management of expectations.
I think, though, it's also what experience are they talking about? Is it the service experience or the employee engagement experience? And I think there has to be a question as to what's the responsibility of the TMC versus what's the responsibility of the corporate buyer to actually deliver that for the employees. And I think there's a big difference there, isn't there? There's the experience of the agency and what they deliver, but then there's the experience of how you make the lives of employees easier on the road. Is that the responsibility of the TMC? And I sort of challenge whether it really is or not. So I think it's difficult to understand where the thought would have been coming from when people rated that. Because if they're talking about service, fair enough, which is probably what was top of mind. But for me, the experience piece is much, much broader than that.
I think there's something really important about what you just said around what Karen just said there around the total experience. I think where maybe this gap comes from is the buyers are expecting that is the TMC's responsibility.
Yeah, could be. And the things that we do, though, that I would consider is important for our employees is not the responsibility of the TMC, and that's getting additional value out of our suppliers for our employees. I don't think that the agency should be responsible for that. I think that's down to our relationship with our suppliers, but it does enhance the experience of our employees.
And that, of course, will differ depending on the size of the organisation that you're working for, which I think is why it's so critically important that it's a partnership at every level. So what sits in my camp, what sits in your camp, and how collaboratively do we get to what we think that end goal is? And if we're talking about traveller experience, how are we measuring that in the first place? How often are we asking the travellers themselves what their expectation is and what that gap looks like from their perspective?
Do you think there is more opportunity for the TMC to get involved in more parts of the traveller experience? And I asked that question because my sort of previous experience within a TMC was that actually the TMC does get the blame for things that are completely outside of their control within the traveller experience. And I think actually that's an endemic challenge within our industry as a whole. There are so many disjointed components within the experience.
I think end users have far greater accessibility for information than they ever have had.
Yeah.
And that creates challenges. That they're faced with media, they're faced with things that may not tend to be gospel, and they have an opportunity to really translate it to reality, and that's the challenge.
It's interesting to hear that, and actually quite refreshing to hear it. I think this whole period has been quite shaping for TMCs. I think this last couple of years has been very shaping in TMCs thinking a lot more about the end-to-end traveller experience. So it's good to hear that there's mutual accountability and a partnership approach to looking at traveller experience. But just another point as well, there was something around high performance mentioned in the output of the research. And I think one of the things that embodies high performance is clarity in roles and responsibilities. Something that Karen said earlier about feeling responsible for many aspects of the traveller experience. But I think where we see success is where there is a clarity in roles and responsibilities between the corporation and the TMCs. And often where it can fall down, it's when both parties aren't clear on roles and responsibilities. So I think that's a big driver of high performance here.
You talked about sort of corporate culture changing and therefore like interest and expectations around the traveller experience changing? I guess, is there any illustrations of that you may have seen?
It's not so much about just my experience of how did I get from A to B. It's how did I feel on that journey? Did I feel that I was being looked after? Did I feel prepared? Did I have the information that I needed to navigate the absolute challenges that I know I'm going to face on that journey, because things aren't easy yet. So it's how does the TMC work with the business really to make sure in partnership that we're thinking about it more holistically than we have done before. It's not just about getting there, it's getting there ready for the meeting that you've travelled for.
Also, strategically, we've seen a massive increase in the conversations that we're having with our customers about their employee experience more broadly. Companies much more tuned into employee experience, investing money in technology that helps their employees collaborate both in and outside of the office. And then travel inevitably plays its part in that strategy, which is actually elevating the conversation of travel within the corporations. And I think it's that ability for TMCs to be flexible, to be able to adjust and adapt to the company culture, and then understand how they play their part in enabling that employee experience. But it's a very different conversation in 2023, 2022 than it was in 2019, I would say.
Data drives action. And when we're talking about well-being, which is really key and focus, when a TMC is delivering solution, it has a wealth of information. It can support the organisation, talk very clearly about the experience as well, and rate that experience that they've had. And I think sometimes there is a lack of utilisation of that data.
I think what sounds like you're saying, if we can find a way to unlock that data, there'll be lots of different opportunities to support that user experience, the traveller experience along the route.
I think you've got to think about our traditional KPIs though as well. Are they still fit for purpose? Because we do have a wealth of data, but are we measuring what really matters now in a different climate? Because it's really hard actually to get a hold of your travellers to measure traveller expectation and experience. I think we go back to NPS, we go back to some pretty traditional KPIs. Are they still fit, or do we need to relook at those so that we really test that gap? Is that gap real, or have we just maybe not looking in the right places or need to change our measurement?
So does that go back to Lyndsey's point about actually it's about how they feel, but they're being fit for purpose on the trip? How do you measure that? I mean,
well, and I think it depends, doesn't it, on your corporation and your culture and why people are travelling, because we're not all travelling for the same reasons, a little bit bad. So the purpose of your trip, so what's important to your company and what's going to, be important to your travellers when they're on that trip? Is it about just getting from A to B? Sometimes it is, other times it's a lot more intangible than that. So I think maybe what we've been measuring traditionally needs to be relooked at.
And I think this whole return to travel, because there was no travel, people suddenly realised how much they missed it. But what they also realised as it came back was that there was a TMC and there was a team that managed all of this. And so certainly now I think the roles have been elevated as high as they have ever been. And so we need to seize on that opportunity. Now is the time, though, to really elevate those roles and keep them where they should be, which is at the top, rather than behind the scenes.
As well, we just mentioned earlier around should TMCs be getting into other areas? Ask your clients. Absolutely the right time to ask it, because everybody's stretched so thin. All the stuff that used to work kind of isn't working anymore as well. So it's the perfect time to say, right, well, maybe your team size is different, travel's come back quicker than you expected. Where are you struggling? How can we sort of solution sell for you to help you with more stuff? I think you'd get some really interesting answers that you didn't expect. So
it sounds like then the gap isn't a failure in delivery, it's actually about, it's the size of the opportunity at hand. And actually, if you ask the right questions, you identify the right types of services to support the traveller experience, then there's kind of lots of wonderful new potential here to be had. You agree with that?
I think so, and I think it also allows you to come back and redefine and re-clarify those roles and responsibilities. The traveller just wants one person to go to. If something doesn't go wrong, just fix it, that one person, please. They don't differentiate between the TMC and the travel manager. You're just travel as a unit. So I think it's not for them, but I think behind the scenes, if we relook at where are our pain points now? How different are they since travel's come back? Where do we need to re-look at the accountability, and how can we help each other in a different way? I think it's the perfect time to ask some of those questions again.
Building on that, do you think the TMCs as a whole understand what the buyer values?
And, there's many examples out there, but I think sometimes we think that our travellers want choice. Our travellers want to fly on the airlines they're loyal to. And that's the reality of it. But if you pose that to some of your TMC contacts, that's quite shocking. And so I think it all comes down to everybody having the right conversations internally versus somebody with a title of travel manager saying that they know everything about their company when the reality is they probably don't.
I read a great quote: expectations are premeditated resentments.
I love that. Yeah.
I think it's really good, but I think within that also unspoken expectations are almost guaranteed to fail. So again, you've got to raise that conversation, all of us, haven't we? It's our jobs as travel managers to ask our clients internally and then to be able to articulate that. It's hard, I think it's really hard, but you are more than likely going to fail if you don't speak and can't articulate those expectations.
And it's absolutely right that we focus on improvements completely, but we should never forget strengths. And the industry has a lot of strengths, and there's obviously great examples within the community that were asked that deliver high-performing programs.
But if they're performing, their expectations are high, and the TMC's performing really well, we should showcase that.
I think there has to be that constant engagement. Yeah. I really, really do. I'm very passionate about that. That as a travel buyer, and speaking to a number of travel buyers, is that you don't know everything. You can't know everything. And things are changing so quickly that there is an expectation of a TMC, support me, help me, let's try different things, let's innovate, be prepared to fail.
You just made me think of something actually in terms of the dynamic of high-performing relationships between a TMC and a buyer, where the buyer creates space for a partnership to flourish and to create an environment where a TMC feels as though they can push the boundaries, drive new innovation, be prepared to fail in certain aspects.
It sort of strikes me that some of the things that you've said the requirement may differ quite considerably between buyers and their cultures and their programs and their company types. There's already a differentiation in sort of certain types of buyers, so oil and gas or energy and marine, for example. But do you think that actually if there's a real expectation, desire and a focus on traveller experience, that actually you start to set the scene for more differentiation between the TMCs and the TMCs can really define where they can excel, the space they can excel in? Do you think that's more of an opportunity as well?
Is it traveller experience or is it customer need? Mm-hmm. Is it the same thing? But I think being increasingly more granular in your understanding around what the specific customer need is, based on either the industry segment that customer works within or the business that traveller is on. Everybody's needs are different, but we've got to unpack what we mean by data. What is it specifically that we think we can do with data that is going to enhance the traveller experience? Now, obviously, insights from data to better understand traveller behaviour, to then reiterate product to improve the overall experience is probably the best place to start. But
because you have different types of travellers as an example, but in general, we treat them all the same. And so I think there is an opportunity by using data of the first-time traveller versus the road warrior and what should the programme look like for those individuals. And I think that's where you can use data to really enhance the programme and then the experience by the individuals for sure.
Yeah.
Know who I am, know where I am. Deliver information to me at the right set point when I need it, rather than send me information that has no relevance to a trip or where I am and how can it improve what I'm doing. And data can help shape that. And I do agree, it needs to be unpacked.
It's also about how the TMC uses that information though, isn't it? Because the traveller themselves, a lot of the travellers that many of us would work with are very experienced travellers. They've been doing this for a long time. And one of the biggest frustrations from an experience standpoint is that's not how I remember it. That's not how that used to be. So if you really understand your traveller and you can really talk to that challenge, you have to be able to give people comfort back in travelling for business at quite a personal level.
But always look at the experience, or whether that's end users' experience of the last 2 years, as to how we move forward. So those points you make are absolutely relevant because things have changed.
You know, there are some fundamental kind of personalisation gaps in the travel industry that I think drive frustration sometimes through the journey that end up back on our plate for us to deal with. So I think it's an industry opportunity.
And it sounds like there's some quick wins if we actually really focused on this, and then there's some sort of bigger pieces like the use of data and deeper insights and personas and things like that.
I think we often look to the leisure industry and see where they're leading what we all experience in our personal lives. Yeah, the leisure agency is really honing on that personalisation and making sure it feels, welcome back and really glad to have you back. This is what's different. We know to your point, really, this is what we did last time. This is how it's going to be different. That's worked pretty well. I think that's something we can learn from.
We have a little bit of a theory in Festive Road around why there is such a big focus on spend management and cost in travel management versus the traveller, in that that's how travel management came about. And so TMCs for years have been sort of judged on whether they can manage spend effectively, and it's been a lot about financials. Are the travel manager community clear enough on articulating their priorities so that the TMCs know which of those that they need to prioritise on? So as an example, whenever we are helping a client go into a sourcing exercise, very clearly at the beginning we'll say, random exercise, we've got $100,000 and all 5 of you on this travel team get $100,000 and you get to invest it in anything in your programme across these 3 areas. You've either got managed cost for your company, you've got to improve the customer experience, or you've got to improve care, be that for the person or the planet. You 5 would all come up with completely different investments. There isn't this common... I've never yet seen a travel team come up with a common, absolutely 80,000 I would put into cost management, or 80,000... There is this real variety. And then when we go and ask an executive team, you get a real variety all over again. So I think that actually is one really solid opportunity to get complete alignment if you're in the buyer community of what your priorities are, so that you can really feed that in and create the environment for the TMC. And I would fully expect it, if you were from 5 different companies as you are, for it to be 5 different answers, but inside the same company, you would hope for there to be some alignment. We haven't found a company yet that has that alignment across the travel team. And then if you make it even wider into stakeholder groups or travellers, it's like the Wild West. So I would see that as a real opportunity, one, for the travel managers to create that clarity amongst themselves, but then with their supplier community, then the TMCs will know where they stand and what they need to be focused on, to your point, Jason, about creating the right environment.
What is the travel management value algorithm? So if you have a marginal dollar, where do you place it? Yeah.